The Premier League is very surprising. I've been surprised, and I'm JJ Bull.
I'm Jon Mackenzie.
And I'm Jon Mackenzie. And so what we're going to do here is look at some of the teams that have really surprised us in the Premier League so far this season after only 3 games. Because if you look at the table, what you'll notice is a very surprising thing. West Ham United are very high up on the table. Does that make sense? We don't know, because sometimes, Jon, the table lies.
The table does lie, JJ, all the time.
And if we look at a different kind of table, which does not lie, or maybe it does, we don't know yet, the underlying numbers of expected goals and expected goals against, what we see is that Brighton are first for expected goals. But if they're so good, Jon, how come they lost to West Ham?
Well, that's the question, JJ, and to answer that, we need to think a little bit about how Brighton are going to generate their chances, because what Brighton are really good at is creating space in behind that they can then exploit, particularly through their wingers, making these nice out-to-in runs. Now, the way that they do that is by baiting presses. What I mean by that is that in their build-up phase, they're going to sit super deep like this. They'll even have their front line dropping in as well.
Like a trapper in a field with animals. They're baiting them.
The idea then is that the opposition should then respond to that by stepping up, leaving space in behind, and then Brighton have these really nice passing routines that they can move through the opposition press and then find these balls into the wide areas, into the feet of wingers like Mitoma, and they can then score. But there's a very big problem with this.
There's a big problem with it. Is it a surprising problem?
It's a big, surprising problem, and that is that if you don't accept the bait of the press, teams can just sit deep and then say to Brighton, come on then, come at us and try and break us down. And that has been causing Brighton problems for the last season.
So this is the thing. So is this surprising for this season? Because teams, we know how Brighton play now, but West Ham came out and had about 22% possession in this game, knowing if they sat deep, Brighton would have to open up to then try and beat them in this low block, this deep block. And then that's where they're able to punish them on the counter-attack. So does that mean that Brighton perform very well against good teams who have to open up against them, and then they might actually end up losing against what we'll call a weaker team like West Ham?
Yeah, with a team like West Ham, they know that their strength is going to be box defending, so they can just throw everyone around the box, make it really hard for Brighton to break them down, and leave them basically all of the ball and say to them, okay, we'll give you the ball in wide areas, you can sling the ball in and try and beat our centre-backs and central midfielders to headers. And the upside of this is that actually Brighton can get Brightoned, because if West Ham win the ball, they have players who are really good at this counter-attacking football into the space that is now behind, because Brighton have committed so many players forward.
So do we think Brighton are actually genuinely good then?
I think Brighton are genuinely good, and I think a lot of teams will try and do that low block and counter against them. It won't always work, but it did against West Ham.
Well, another team that has surprised us is how good Aston Villa are. We knew they were good last season. Don't get me wrong. But this season, they're playing very well. How do they play, Jon?
Well, I think they're very, very similar in many respects to Brighton, because they're doing the same sort of thing. They're
trying to trap some animals.
Trying to trap some animals, but they're going to do it in a very different way, because as we saw with Brighton, they sit really deep and then they try and play the ball through the middle of the field. Actually, what Villa are going to do is they have these really nice triangles in wide areas where they can have overloads against the opposition, bait them in, and then what they're going to do once they've baited those players in, they're going to try and find their attacking players in the half spaces here. And it's really nice, because if you get overloaded by the opposition out of possession here, you have these nice escape routes, so you can go via the goalkeeper to the other side, and you've got the same structure on the other side as well. But the difference between Brighton is that Brighton are going through the middle and then moving out wide, whereas with Villa, what we're getting is they're going out wide, and then the idea is to move it inside to their attackers. So you can see we've got two narrow attacking players here.
Here's a surprising thing for you as well, in that in losing Tyrone Mings, Villa lost their big, most aggressive centre-back who can smash headers away and kick people out the stadium. But they brought in Pau Torres, who's not very good aerially. We've sort of known that for a long time. He's not the strongest in the air. So what that's meant, then they can't really go away from playing Torres on this left side, with Diego Carlos to come in now, which means Konza goes out here. But it's one of these new formations that they've got. Rodinho pushes forward and they come around as a 3. Then they've got a really good midfield 2 here. And they're playing Cash as more of a forward, more of a winger, which means McGinn comes inside. And now what you've got is Diaby and Ginn playing either side of Watkins, who's one of the best forwards in the league. You've got this very modern-looking front 5 with fullbacks who are covered by these players here. It's a good, solid team. It's quite surprising.
It is quite surprising, but as you say, we sort of expected it on the basis of last season. But I think, as we said in the previous video, this is a team that know exactly what they're doing. They've got really good players. They have a great manager who's really well prepared. So I think that Villa will do quite well this season.
Well, here's something I can surprise you with, Jon. Brentford. Did you know that they are 4th for expected goals and 2nd best for expected goals against? Why don't we consider them a great team yet?
Well, with Brentford, I think people look on paper and they see the players and they think, that's not individually great players. And I think the thing with Brentford is that they are able to actually make the sum of the parts greater than the whole. And that's great, especially when you have a player like Ivan Toney, who they obviously are missing for the next few months. And I think a lot of people expected them to drop off, because when you have a player like Toney who scores a lot of goals for you, and you are a team like Brentford, you expect it to have a massive impact. But actually, we've seen Brian Mbeumo, Johan Wissa stand up and score those goals instead of him. So yeah, I think that's the thing that surprised me about Brentford, is that they've lost Ivan Toney for a few months and they've just not looked like they've missed a beat.
Now, another team who is definitely a top-tier team in the past, and who has surprised us goodly, is Tottenham Hotspur. Now, if we look at Tottenham Hotspur, the thing to me that jumps out and is surprising is that I suspected, as we've said in the past, that Postecoglou ball, as we shall call it, would work.
If only there was an easier title than
There's
that.
no way. There's no way to make it easier than that, sadly. But in happier news, we thought it would work. We knew it would work eventually, and thought it would take a bit of time at the start and it would be a bit of a mess. But they've got some good results, and it looks far better than we maybe thought it would have done. But have they been as good as they could be? What's going to happen with Spurs? Why is it surprising?
I think with Spurs, they've had a few results go the right way for them. So they could have lost to Brentford and that turned around. Manchester United were quite good against them in the first half and that changed around. So there's another timeline not that far away where we're talking about Spurs being like, oh, we can see the signs of them doing well, but the results haven't been there yet. But
and of course, that timeline is happening simultaneously.
That's right. It's one of the
future
other
the past,
possible worlds.
Yeah,
Now, exactly. Yeah. But fortunately for them, everything has gone relatively well, and we're starting to see the fruits of Ange Postecoglou's system. And it's a really, really exciting system. We get these inverting fullbacks and lots of nice build-up. So we saw that against Bournemouth. They were able to play through Bournemouth's really aggressive press. And then the idea then is that you get the ball into these sorts of areas where you can then play cutbacks across into a central player. Now, Richarlison hasn't been performing as well as Spurs fans would want him to in terms of the production of goals. So that's something to look out for. But I think the most interesting thing for me is the players that they have in the wide positions, because when these two areas are so important, you want to get your wide players into those areas to be able to play the ball in. And there's questions about whether or not Son and Kulusevski are the most efficient players to be able to find these kind of areas by going both ways around fullbacks and arriving with the ball at the edge of the box here. So I think the big question for me about Spurs is going to be whether or not they improve the quality of players they have in those wide spots in terms of their ability to go around fullbacks. Because if they can do, I think they'll be laughing and they'll be in with a shout of getting top four.
That's right. Also, I think it's quite good looking at how Maddison has jumped into this team and adjusted very, very well immediately. Also, Pape Sarr's come in and looked fantastic. And another way they create chances, not just these cutbacks, is what you get is the 2-8s will sit up here and they'll make these runs beyond the striker. So you'll have someone who'll play a ball from here and it'll curl it round to one of these runners who sneaks in behind because you don't expect them to do it. So it's one of the many ways they score. But if they drop in to get on the ball and then a fullback replaces them, it's very, very fluid. That's why it's so surprising that it already seems to be working. And it's quite complicated. So when it works even better, they'll be doing better than just getting, they beat Man United, didn't they? Which brings us on to West Ham, who have surprised us much goodly in that they're actually good this year, and part of that is to do with changing their system, because they've gone from being a possession-based team, which did not work, to being more of a counter-attack team, and that means they now have far less possession. Against Bournemouth, it was 38%, and you think they have more than Bournemouth normally, I would have thought. And then they had 22 and 28% against Chelsea, who they beat, and they also beat
Brighton,
who were at the start of the surprising part of this video.
Yeah, and I think that you get that cycle with David Moyes, right, where he does really well playing low block and counter football, and West Ham get towards the top of the table, and then the big question is, what changes can we make to the system in order to be able to compete at the top all the time? And then they bring in a few players to play that way. It doesn't really work out. Those players leave, and then we get back on the upswing of the Moyes cycle, and I feel as though that is where we are now. But yeah, the game against Brighton was just classic low block and counter football. Really, really nice to watch. Because you've got players who know exactly what they're supposed to do, players who are able to sit deep in a block out the opposition from generating any dangerous chances, and then when they win the ball, have these really efficient ways of going forward and scoring. And I think everyone enjoys that kind of smash and grab kind of football.
Now, the other side of the table is the people who have surprised us badly. And that includes Fulham, who, as you'll be able to see right now, have terrible underlying numbers, which actually is the same as last season.
Yeah, they are looking absolutely awful if you look at the underlying numbers. So in terms of expected goal difference, they're on -7, which is miles worse than anyone else's.
But they drew with Arsenal.
Yeah, it's surprising. They also beat Everton, despite the fact that Everton had hundreds and hundreds of chances there as well. But if you look at their expected goal difference per 90 minutes, on average, you would expect their opponents to put up 2.34 expected goals more than they do in every game, which, let me tell you, is not a good sign. You'll probably end up getting relegated on that kind of form.
On a scale of 1 to crab. How bad is that?
Crab. Very crab.
That's bad. Crab is bad. Another team that surprised us by being quite poor, I think, is Manchester United, who do not look better than last season despite spending money in the summer to improve in a way that Ten Hag specifically wanted. We know they want to be a team that excels in transition, but they're really not controlling us very well. They're not playing out from the back very well. Wolves were excellent against them. I'm never surprised how good Wolves have been. But should we expect more from Man United at this stage, John?
Yeah, I think Man United is surprising because they've got really good expected goal numbers, but actually the problem with that is they have really bad expected goal against numbers. So they're generating chances, but they're also leaching a lot of chances as well in the other direction. And I think, in many respects, you can make the argument that Manchester United are fine this season. They're being a little bit unlucky in terms of finishing, and in the long run, you'd expect them to be okay. But I think given that we've got continuity with Erik ten Hag from last season, they've had a window where they've been saying they're getting the players that they wanted in. Actually, you want them to be more than fine. You want them to be good. You want them to be a team who are challenging for the title. And I don't think that's
fear
happening.
them. I don't think anyone really worries about playing them at the moment, really.
Yeah. And I think there's some questions to be asked about the fitness as well. So there's been a few injuries that have happened so far, which is causing them problems.
Yeah.
There was questions asked about whether or not their pre-season tour was motivated more by commercial aspects than it was in terms of getting the team ready for playing in the Premier League. And the result of that has been that they're now looking around for a left back because they've got no available senior left backs. So I think there are questions to be asked about Manchester United, but I think I was surprised with them because I had them down as a team who I thought were going to be up there in terms of the Champions League spots and pushing on towards the title race. And I'm starting to question that myself.
So we had to put them between an octopus and a crab, where would they be?
I'd say probably midpoint between octopus and crab.
Which would be an octo-crab. Powerful creature. Also, we have in this list of teams that have they've surprised us, but in a bad way, is Arsenal. Would you believe it? Because everyone loves Arsenal now. Mikel Arteta has changed the system. He's tweaked it from what was working last season. Maybe that makes sense. You're constantly evolving. But things have changed, and you're going to tell me what those are.
Yes, it's all about tactical flexibility, because at the end of last season, Arsenal fell away because they didn't have the correct players to do like-for-like replacements. So, for example, Rob Holding was brought in to replace William Saliba, and none of the system aspects changed at all. And so this season, the watchword has been tactical flexibility. And I think as a result of that, the players they brought in have been about tactical flexibility. So we've got Kai Havertz, Declan Rice. We had Jurrien Timber as well before he got injured. The problem is, I think maybe there's an argument to be made that there's too much flexibility going on here. What I mean by that, for example, is that, so this is the lineup that they had in the most recent game. They're playing Declan Rice as a 6, but if you want to play Declan Rice as a 6, you have to have someone alongside him, I think, to help with the build-up as well. And the way that they've been doing that, because Zinchenko, who is so important to their build-up, is injured, is that they've had to use Thomas Partey as an inverting fullback on the right. Now, to accommodate that, they've just shifted the defence around. So they've got rid of Gabriel. They've used Ben White, the right back, as a right-sided centre-back, and Saliba as the centre-back. And Kivior and Tomiyasu have also filled in these areas. And the idea then is Partey inverts, and then you can end up with your back three. But because you're inverting from the other side, you have to use White as the outside centre-back. So everything just pushes around. Gabriel drops out. And the problem is that you've got, if you look at that original starting back line, it's just completely different from the system that they used last season. Declan Rice is a different player as well. So you've ended up with your build-up routes just completely changing. And so far, Arsenal just haven't been able to consistently move the ball down the field well enough to consistently generate the really dangerous chances, I think, through the middle of the field. I think that's the important thing. Because of their build-up, they were able to generate chances in this sort of area. Because their build-up isn't great, they've been playing down the wide areas a little bit more, and I think that just reduces the danger of the chances that you can create.
Yeah, also, the thing I've noticed is Saka, you want to get him in these positions to be able to shoot, but he's often stuck in this wide area, especially in this build-up phase, because of the way that Partey then comes inside. You don't have any overlapping move from this player here, so it's not quite the same as it was last season. Mm-hmm. I wonder whether he might surprise us all and change back to something like worked last season, even though he wants to try something new. Who knows? It's very surprising.
I think we've got Zinchenko back now, so we can see that system from last season actually playing out on the field, and that will improve in that sort of area as well. So there's definitely the situation here that, one, Arsenal can go back to their original system from last season, but also you would hope in the long run that tactical flexibility does give them the edge in other games as well.
Chelsea have had lots of trouble. They've had a lot of new players. It's a whole brand new team, and you can see it's coming together. Are you surprised by how either good or bad it looks? I
think they look okay, actually, and I've maybe towards the more surprised goodly side of the spectrum, because as we said, they've had a huge amount of turmoil in the last few years. They've completely overhauled their back office and front office and all of their players, and they had too many players, and now they've sold a lot of players. They brought a lot of new players in again this window. And actually, again, if you look at the underlying numbers with the proviso that it's only 3 games, so it's not particularly representative of anything, but they have been putting up numbers to suggest that they are turning a corner from what they were last season. So yeah, I'm really interested to see what they do, because in many respects, like, we don't know what's going to happen even at this point in the season because there's so many moving parts.
Well, that's lots of surprises. I'm sure you agree. Perhaps you should tell me what your surprises are in the comments to help drive engagement and promote the video higher on YouTube's algorithm. John, what's your biggest surprise?
I don't know. What do you think?
I don't know anything. Bye!
If you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. The Athletic is home to some of the world's best sports journalists, including journalists dedicated to each Premier League team, so every fan gets the coverage they deserve, not just the big clubs. And you can try it for free now for 30 days. See the link in the description.